We are now joined via Zoom by energy analyst Hilton Trollip to just discuss further, just some of the challenges that the utility is facing. Thank you so much for your time, Hilton, this afternoon. So a lot said there in that briefing, and I'd like us to touch on just some of the key highlights that you were able to get out of that briefing. And I mean, importantly, the CEO of Eskom saying that the probability of total blackouts remain very low. Of course, that is a huge concern for South Africans. Talk to us about just some of the key highlights that you found, from that briefing.
Good afternoon. Well, thanks again for inviting me to share my views. I would say there's nothing really new. There's a lot of detail. It's great to see the transparency. I think there's a lot of honest speaking. And when I say there's nothing new, the overall pattern that remains is that there are these approximately 80 really big machines at 13 power stations, and they're either really old and they've been hammered, or they're the new ones that have got design flaws and construction flaws. And then, so firstly, there's those 80 really big machines, and then secondly, because they've been hammered and they're old, at any stage, about half of them, so 40, are out of action. And of that 40, about 10 are planned maintenance, which is like servicing your car, but 30 are unplanned maintenance. And no organization, such as Eskom, is designed to continually try and fix, under pressure, 30 unplanned maintenance units. So they don't have the skills, they don't have the resources. They've made this clear. They have begged government to connect additional generating capacity to the grid to give what Andre de Ruyter calls some headroom. Otherwise, we'll have this vicious cycle of the organization under immense pressure with skills and resources possibly to fix 20 machines at a time, but having to fix 40. And they mentioned human error there. Of course, there's going to be human error always, but the more you put people under pressure for longer and longer, and also you start experiencing demoralization, because I think a government has very unfairly put the entire blame for this on Eskom, whereas government has failed with its independent power producer program since 2015 through any bid window to connect a single new IPP to the grid. The IPP program, that's the independent power producer program, the main way that new generation capacity gets onto the grid, has all but failed. But the government is keeping very quiet about that because it's a government failure. So all of this remains the same. We're in a vicious cycle of an organization under huge pressure, being put on increasing pressure as these machines get older and they can't fix them properly. And I'm afraid until they get that headroom to look after those machines, things will get worse. Stage 8 is just waiting. It could happen now. 2 additional units could go out at Lethabo, and that would be another stage. We'd be at 7.
And
another problem with the coal at Lethabo, similar problem.
And Hilton, I want us to put that then into perspective, just in terms of what this means, particularly from the megawatts that we have lost. I mean, in its statement yesterday, the utility saying that a number of breakdowns amount to 21,243 megawatts of generating capacity, while 3,555 megawatts of generating capacity is out of service, for plant maintenance. Essentially, we are speaking here more than 24,700 megawatts of Eskom's installed capacity of the 48,000 megawatts out of service, as of this morning. I mean, this is, and as Eskom has also indicated, this is a new record for Eskom. And of course, this is why it's triggered, these rolling blackouts and why we are in stage 6. Then when you couple that with the statements that are made this morning in terms of the likelihood of us going into stage 8 at this moment, is very minimal, but also that the utility has plans in place in terms of contingencies. How likely is this practical even?
So I didn't listen to every word of the interview because I was swapping over to you guys, but I don't think I heard them say that the chances of going to level 8 are low. I think I heard them saying the chances of an overall system blackout is low. Let me just explain the difference. An overall system blackout is if the system operator fails to implement load shedding to make sure that supply and demand are met. So with an electricity system, you always have to have the same amount of supply as demand, otherwise you get a blackout. So when supply is constrained, they cut off demand. So that's a system operator's job. So that's what, and I think that they can manage that. That's the very low chance. But what I did hear them say is it's unpredictable and low reliability. All of these plants, these 40 megawatts of the 48 megawatts are really low. That's the coal plants. They really have a low reliability. And it's quite easy. I didn't hear them saying this, that it couldn't easily be another couple of units offline and we'd be into level 8 territory. Of course, that's not a much bigger disaster than now because it's just even longer periods every day that we have a blackout. The catastrophe is if the system operator doesn't cut load if there's not enough supply. But in general, I'm repeating myself, but more than half of the coal-fired stations are offline. Of that, most of them are broken, not being properly serviced, they're off the road. They were driving along and they're off the road. And Eskom simply doesn't have the ability to fix that number of units day in and day out and day in and day out. And they've made that very clear to us. So we can expect, we also know this now, we can expect ongoing serious levels of load shedding until we get more generating capacity onto the grid. And government is responsible for that.
Very quickly, Hilton, before I let you go, of course, we know that Finance Minister Arnot will be tabling his budget. Do you think we'll hear more detail just about how government will relieve Eskom of its debt? I mean, we're hearing a figure of 81 billion rands of capital and interest amount, with the current financial year ending 31 March, which is Eskom's debt obligations.
So it's anybody's guess, really, what the finance minister is going to do. He has said that he's going to make an announcement. It is very important for Eskom to at least have a debt level that it can manage. Otherwise, the other problem is that they're always operating in the red. On their annual budget, they're spending more on interest than on anything else. So they can't spend money on maintenance, staff development, etc., etc. And one of the biggest reasons for that debt is those two new power stations. They originally were budgeted for 80 billion. They've already cost 300 billion. One of them has only got one unit running, and that is a disaster. And that's a whole story on its own. But the fact of the matter is Eskom has got an unsustainable level of debt. And I hope that the finance minister normalizes Eskom's debt soon, so that they can at least attend to other issues other than this crippling debt.
Hilton, thank you so much for your analysis and your time this afternoon. Really do appreciate it.